pleasure to have Arminio Fraga with us today. For those of you that don't know, Arminio was the president of the central bank during Fernando Henrique Cardoso. He really helped turn the Brazilian economy around, lower inflation, implement the economic plan. And then he left the central bank when President Lula became president and started his own investment fund. And he is also the main financial economic advisor for Aécio Neves, one of the presidential candidates. So let me start by asking you, what is your view of a 21st century Brazilian economy, and what has to happen to achieve it?
We're at the moment having this amazing debate against the backdrop of an economy that's in recession. And moreover, one that has been growing slowly for a while. And if you look at, say, the region, during the Cardoso years, Brazil and Latin America, the rest of Latin America grew at around the same pace. The same thing happened during the Lula years. Those were better global years, but we were there with the average of the region. And since 2011, we've been 2 percentage points below the average. So something is wrong. And I think this has to do with an approach that doesn't deliver enough investment, that doesn't really focus on productivity, and as a result, has been frustrating our expectations.
Brazil is an economy that is very entrepreneurial. And one of the things that really holds entrepreneurship back is lack of definition of rule of law, a huge bureaucracy. It can take 6 months to close a company, and in this country you can close a company like that and start your next company. Tax regime is awful. No one understands what they're supposed to pay, and that goes broader. So how do you get rid of this bureaucracy? How do you change the mentality?
First of all, there has to be, over time, enough of an effort to change the architecture of the system so that it becomes less prone to small policy changes that can be manipulated or that can be lobbied. And where things are, as you put it very well, much simpler. We have this amazingly complex tax system. And one little tweak of one of those tax rules can mean a lot of money for somebody. And there'll be, of course, as you can imagine, a lot of lobbying for that to be the case. So there's a design flaw. And then I think there's also an element of kind of moving towards the overall global economic system and being an economy that is not so closed as we are now. We're not completely closed, we're not talking an extreme case, but we could be a lot more open. And that would bring more competition, more technology, more incentives for companies to do what they ought to be doing, that is to be running their business well rather than taking the shuttle to Brasilia and spending time fighting for some new gimmick that might help that particular company, but it will do the overall economy no good. That's the bad news. The good news, if you want to look at it, take a slightly different angle, is there's so much that could be done. Mm-hmm. So I'm not, at the moment, worried with where we are. I think we're still good enough that with better government, things could turn around well. We haven't gone that far in the wrong path to prevent us from turning this big ship around.
How do you jumpstart the economy? How do you get it growing again? Because eventually it will hit the unemployment numbers. It will hit the basic population. So how do you get Brazil growing at capacity?
Yeah. See, right now confidence is way down. There's uncertainty at the macro level with the low growth, high inflation, price controls, and so on. And then there's these hundreds of little things at the micro level that get in the way of progress. So if someone comes along and they start changing this, I think the impact could be very meaningful, very. Take the case of infrastructure. And infrastructure means a lot. I'm talking roads, ports, airports, sewage, etc. If you do what you suggest and put in place reasonable rules, these are all, for the most part, regulated sectors, reasonable rules that make sense and that people can trust, it'll happen.
Huge challenge, no?
Huge, but
an
that's
opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly the point. Most countries, you think of infrastructure as something that is safe and that doesn't offer very high returns. So that's the classic combination. Lower risk, lower return. In Brazil right now, the returns are low, but there's a lot of risk. So that doesn't make any sense, and it's no wonder the investments are not taking place. So we need to work on the basics. It's just, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and we just need to go after it. It requires a change in mindset, where one doesn't need the government to do everything. The government just has to provide proper rules and to stick with it.
And so if Aécio Neves were to win, or you were to be a financial advisor or economic advisor to the next government, your investment priorities would be infrastructure and, I assume, encouraging the private sector to invest?
I'd say it would be the following. Infrastructure, for sure, because the needs are just so blatant. Then get the macro right. We need to have lower inflation. We need to have more fiscal discipline so we can have lower interest rates, and everything then follows from that. And lastly, I would do tax reform, and I start by looking at indirect taxation. So sales and value-added taxes in Brazil are in bad need of reform. They really have to get fixed. And so those three would be, I think, the natural first steps.
Social inclusion and some of the social subsidies were a hallmark of President Lula, continued by Presidente Dilma. In fact, some of them were started by Fernando Henrique Cardoso, right, if you read Brazilian economic history. Which of those projects would you continue? Would you restructure them? How do you think about social programs and who should get them?
The good news on Brazil is that we have seen a very important decline in poverty rates, and also an improvement in the distribution of income. And we need to go further. We have in place direct transfer programs, one famous one called Bolsa Família, which consolidates some programs that Cardoso put in place, but not only they were consolidated, but they were vastly increased in size, to Lula's credit. And those are very good, and they address extreme poverty. But we need to go beyond that. On the distribution of income in general, I have favored from way back, as has Aécio, that we focus on the equality of creating genuine equality of opportunity. Unfortunately, our public schools are terrible. Most children don't finish school, primary school, even. So that's at the top of the list, and there's no way we're going to become, a developed economy if we don't drastically improve our education system. But other issues as well: public health, public transportation. You may recall a year and a half ago, a lot of people went out in the streets complaining about many things, but particularly at that point of complaining about public transportation. People can't be very productive if they spend 3 hours a day breathing fumes in traffic jams, going to and from work. So that's got to change too. It's also an investment opportunity. Private sector ought to be competing to do that.
How do you divert money from things that are happening today and move that into things like better quality education?
I think it's more of a management problem than a money problem, although probably benefit from a bit more money. But here the discussion will have to move from a budget that is poorly understood and where people don't feel the need to prioritize to a situation where the budget is completely transparent and it's all-inclusive, so everything is in it, and that forces these debates to happen. I think that's crucial. That's one of the things that I believe ought to be done right away as well. Do the accounting right, make sure people know where the money is going so they can monitor what's going on, they can complain, they can vote well, vote better, and so on.
There's also an opportunity, I guess, for Brazil to open the economy more and to broaden its relationships beyond Mercosur.
There's a huge opportunity. Brazil's been waiting for years for something big to happen at the WTO. I would say more recently it was worse. It really didn't do much in the way of looking for more bilateral opportunities. So we're lagging there. Mercosur has become also a problem, not just because it's grown, but over time it seems it gets in the way of a lot of things. Right now Brazil has had this discussion on the table with Europe for quite some time. Of course there are some problems in Europe as well right now, but you know, these things ought to be moving. Many countries have done it. I don't see why we can't.
I think the U.S. would be delighted.
Concluding the negotiation with Europe and opening up fresh discussions with the U.S.
That are mutually acceptable.
Yeah,
because
but these things are always, they need to be discussed, negotiated. It takes time, but it's doable.
my last question is, how do you turn sentiment around in Brazil and make people super optimistic?
One clear, say, guideline coming from the top, from the president, and at the moment we don't have it. I'm not judging this as a matter of anything personal. It's just we have the wrong strategy. So I think the minute we change our strategy and start putting people in places where they can be more productive, including in government, putting the right people there and giving them the right objectives and making them accountable, until that happens, we're going to suffer. But it's doable. It's not that difficult to imagine, anyway.
Thank you very much, Arminio, for
Pleasure.
this open and frank conversation.
Anytime.
Thank you.